Hello everyone, I am Zach Kircher, and you're watching Kircher Talks Entertainment. I bid you welcome to the next episode of my series, I Have Never Seen, which as the name suggests, I review movies that I have never seen before, specifically older films that get voted on by all of you. For this fourth video in the series, I ran a series of polls that resulted in the chosen topic for today's video. It was first narrowed down as a movie from the 80s, then as an action movie, and once we got to the four final choices, Midnight Run from 1988 was selected. If you are interested in helping decide what future videos will be about, please consider subscribing to the channel, and be sure to watch out for posts on my community page. All of the reviews for this series will be decided by the polls which are featured on that community page. Compared to the previous movie that I reviewed on this channel, thankfully I don't have to mull through any controversy before talking about Midnight Run. As far as I know, the people behind this cult classic buddy comedy haven't done anything worth getting in a tizzy over. But before talking about the movie, I do have something to say about its director, Martin Brest. To be more specific, the movie he made before this one, Beverly Hills Cop. Before watching Midnight Run, this was the only film from Martin Brest that I had any exposure to. Unlike most people who have seen Beverly Hills Cop, I frankly didn't think much of it. Yes, that film may have been a huge boost to Eddie Murphy's career, and was a major pop culture touchstone when it first released 40 years ago. For me though, when I first watched it a couple of years ago, it just didn't leave much of an impact. I did not find it funny, compelling, or thrilling enough to live up to its long-standing reputation. Honestly, I've seen episodes of Psych that were funnier and had more interesting mysteries for the characters to solve. That's not some kind of backhanded insult against Psych, for I love that show. My point is that Beverly Hills Cop is just mid. But I knew it would be unfair to not give Martin Brest another chance, since my lack of connection with one of his movies doesn't necessarily mean that he's a bad filmmaker. So, let's now consider his follow-up movie, Midnight Run. I went through most of my life not knowing what this movie was, but when I was in high school, I started listening to a movie discussion podcast called Film Spotting, which has since had a major influence on my love for cinema to this day. The show features something called the Film Spotting Pantheon, which is a catalog of movies that the two co-hosts, Adam and Josh, love so much that they've banned those movies from being brought up in regular conversation. Were it not for this so-called pantheon, they would otherwise reference those movies ad nauseum. It features film bro favorites you might expect, like Pulp Fiction, but one outlier that always stood out to me among the rest was Midnight Run. Against all of these other classics that pretty much everyone agrees are masterpieces, seeing this random action movie from the 80s standing toe-to-toe with them was certainly fascinating to me. But hey, I figured that if these guys whose opinions I deeply trusted loved the movie that much, I probably would too. And yet, over a decade has passed without me having seen it. At least now, thanks to this series, that has changed. Now that I have seen it, what do I think? Yes, it's good.
Pretty darn good.
Now, for all intents and purposes, Midnight Run is a road trip movie. I will admit that even though I try to remain open to watching any kind of movie, usually road trip movies aren't my cup of tea. Aside from the occasional exceptions like planes, trains, and automobiles, a lot of them tend to bug me for their simple premise that the main characters encounter a bunch of hiccups along their journey. It's not so much a threshold of disbelief thing, but more so that the unpredictability gets predictable after a while. You know that with these kinds of movies, the crap hits the fan every 5 minutes, and you either have fun watching the lunacy escalate, or you get annoyed at how ludicrous everything becomes. I don't want to come across as a curmudgeon by saying this, but the latter is usually the case for me. I didn't have this problem with Midnight Run, since the film establishes very early on that this will be a problematic trek across the United States for Robert De Niro's Jack Walsh. His character is a bounty hunter who turns criminals into a bondsman based in Los Angeles. One particular assignment finds him chasing after Jonathan the Duke Mardukas, an accountant played by Charles Grodin, who embezzled $15 million from a notorious crime boss named Jimmy Serrano. The titular Midnight Run is the supposedly simple job of extracting the Duke with an overnight flight to LA, but as it happens with road trip movies, the actual adventure is not so simple. After all, the Duke is also sought after by the FBI, rival bounty hunters, and Jimmy Serrano himself. Therefore, as the stakes continue to rise and Jack Walsh's situation gets more desperate, it makes sense why he and the Duke would get into a great amount of hijinks along the way. And what hijinks they are, for their misadventures going from coast to coast are nothing short smart, hilarious, and action-packed. I won't spoil exactly what they get themselves into, but needless to say, Midnight Run fits right in with other classic action movies of this era. Of course, none of it would have worked if the central relationship between Charles Grodin and Robert De Niro wasn't rock solid, but every scene shared between the two of them just oozes with entertainment value. The idea of pairing up two opposite personalities is nothing new for a buddy comedy, even for the time that this came out, but these actors take it to the next level with their sheer commitment to the bit. De Niro feels every bit of the street-smart douchebag that you would expect him to be, but he also harbors a lot of suppressed emotion, particularly regret, that endears him to the viewer. He's a flawed human being who consigns himself to his rough lifestyle because he sees no other way out of it, which also endears him to the Duke, since the risky choices that got him in his predicament were motivated by a similar outlook. I can appreciate that this movie doesn't try to make the central duo out to be quote-unquote friends, but at the very least, their chemistry comes from their hysterically clashing personalities, their complementary cleverness in getting each other out of sticky situations, and their ultimately common goal of sticking it to the man. I didn't expect this movie to hit me emotionally, yet I found myself increasingly connected to the main duo as they struggle to do the right thing and find solutions to their seemingly insurmountable problems. Their story was compelling for me from beginning to end, especially as they opened up to each other as the film progressed. It also helps that Midnight Run maintains a strong sense of humor throughout. In particular, the film operates very well on two types of humor I respond to. First and foremost, you know how they say that comedy comes from pain? Well, let's just say that whether the credit is owed to screenwriter George Gallo or the actors, someone on this team knew how to create some gut-busting insults. Here's one of my favorite examples.
You guys are the dumbest bounty hunters I've ever seen! You couldn't even deliver a bottle of milk!
And basically everything that comes out of Dennis Farina's mouth is comedy gold, if you can stomach some of the vulgar things he says.
Don't say a word to me, Sidney. Don't say a word to me. I'll get up and I'll bury this telephone in your head.
In my mind, if you're going to use profanity in a movie, do it right, the likes of which Midnight Run absolutely does. The insults and cursing are often so left field and snappy that I was frequently caught off guard, which is where much of my laughter came from. On that same note, the editor also did a great job of providing those unpredictable punches of humor. The editor knew exactly which moments to cut to something else, since just enough time is granted to a punchline before the film moves on to something else, leaving the viewer just slightly behind the movie, causing them to laugh once what they saw and heard registers in the brain. Comedy may be subjective in the sense that what makes one laugh differs from person to person, but Midnight Run shows that there is an art to crafting and delivering jokes. If there is any weak link in the film though, I would say that as the film crept into its second half, it did start to feel a bit repetitive to me. I was actually pretty excited going into this part of the movie since the story was not only progressing to scenes taking place in Arizona, but they were legitimately filmed in locations such as Flagstaff, Sedona, and locations within the Navajo Nation. Sorry for the tangent, it just bugs me that movies will say they're set in Arizona, but then the filming locations would be in like New Mexico or something. I like seeing the Grand Canyon State represented on screen, dang it. Anyway, these scenes are actually very entertaining in a vacuum, but the overall pacing of the film slowed down a bit too much for me in this section. Perhaps they'll flow better on the second watch since I'll know what to expect, but while in the moment, I was feeling the length of the film since similar beats had already been hit earlier on in the story. It did pick back up once the main duo reached Flagstaff though, so the pacing issues weren't that big of a deal. I also wasn't a huge fan of the soundtrack, with much of the original music being quite dated in its late 1980s time period. That's more of a personal preference, so take that criticism with a grain of salt. When looked at as a whole, Midnight Run delivers pretty much everything I could want from a film like this. The characters are memorable, it's consistently funny, the story is compelling, and I can appreciate that it was both clever and unafraid of being rough around the edges. I would go so far as to say that this is now among my favorite buddy comedies, at least that I've seen. It has flaws that hold it back from total greatness, but I can picture rewatching this many more times over the years, whether the occasions are with my wife or my buddies. Only time will tell if it gets inducted into a Kircher Talks Entertainment pantheon, just like it had with the Film Spotting guys. With that being said, I strongly recommend Midnight Run, most especially to those who love buddy comedies. It is rated R pretty much exclusively for profanity, so I would say that it's palatable for anyone in your household who is okay with consistent language. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. For doing so really does help my channel, and I will see you all in the next one.